I've done two terms now, which is 4 years, and I'm seeking a third term because even though we, you know, I feel like we had a lot of accomplishments over the last 4 years, there's still a whole heck of a lot of work to do, and I'm hoping to continue doing that work and serving the 26th district.
Talk through some of your accomplishments. Real easy questions to start. Tell us what you're most proud of from these 2 terms.
Well, when I first came in, obviously one of the biggest issues was, you know, the McCleary fix, and I wasn't exactly happy with everything that had happened with the McCleary fix. I think we still need to fix how we fund special education. I still think we need to fix how we fund school construction. I'm happy with some of the parameters that we put around funding teachers and you know, in ensuring that our levy dollars are spent the way that they're supposed to be spent. So that was a huge win. One of the things that I was working on was the health insurance premiums, because the teachers, the way that they did the health insurance premiums, that theirs was worse than what we have in the legislature, and I felt that they needed something similar to what we have in the legislature. We created the SEB, and I think that that was a huge win for teachers.
Is that an opt-in thing that they have now?
I believe that everybody gets the SEB.
They just changed the thing. Oh.
Yeah, but
is that an acronym?
Yes, it's a student or a school employees benefit board, and so basically they're going to have. It'll be very similar to what we have as in the legislature, which is the public employees benefit board, instead of having each school district having to barter for the healthcare premiums.
So, and it's the same thing like other state departments.
Correct.
They operate.
Correct. Correct. And I think that the way that we fund school construction, that's one of the things that I'm going to be working on. And
tell us what you want to work on there.
Well, I think that the current formula that we have is not fair. There's actually some school districts that don't even qualify for SCAP dollars, but yet they're still required to follow this wonky formula in order to, you know, in order to put out a bond. And in addition, we charge for tax on school construction. I think that needs to go away, and I think that we need to make sure that we are providing a fair bidding process for these construction or for the school construction jobs, and hopefully we can reduce the cost of school construction. Right now, the average on the state is over $500 per square foot. I think that because of the dollar amount, that's one of the reasons as to why the South Kitsap bond and the Peninsula bond failed. That's part of the reason why it failed, because, you know, for the bond for the Peninsula School Board, it was $220 million. That's a huge sticker shock for people, and I think that if we can reduce the cost of school construction, that I'm hopeful. I mean, there was also other parts as to why that bond failed, but I'm hopeful that the people will pass a bond and we can adequately build schools to keep up with the demand.
So it's more addressing the cost of it.
Correct.
Not necessarily taking the responsibility away from local voters to pass a reject bond.
Well, in an ideal world, we would revamp the whole thing, but that's probably not very realistic. I do think that we can make some fixes. That what is realistic is to make some fixes as to how the formula is done, and hopefully reduce the school construction costs.
You made reference to having a fair bidding process. How is it unfair right now?
So I'm currently working with a gentleman who's a whistleblower who he has showed me quite a bit of information as to how the construction was not done in a fair bidding process. So that's one of the things. So we'll see.
One of the things talking about schools, when you've been in the past, we've talked a lot about accountability.
Correct.
And some of your ideas on ways that you would like to see reporting done, different things like that. Now that there's, you've done the levy swap, you've kind of come up with more dollars to satisfy this demand. What are you going to do, or what are you going to look for as far as making sure the money is spent correctly and there's results behind it? What do you think needs to be done next for that?
Well, one of the big things that we put in was parameters around what the levy dollars were supposed to be allocated for. Now, one thing I have learned is that just because what we pass in Olympia, we can all sit there and pat ourselves on the back and say, yeah, we did this. Sometimes just because we pass something with the intentions that we have doesn't mean that that's what happens on the ground floor. So for me personally, like, since after we passed the parameters around the local school levies, that's one thing I want to make sure happens, is that when the school districts go out and they say, hey, this is what the levy dollars are supposed to be spent on. If you guys want a lacrosse team, that's what these levy dollars will be spent on, and that and to hold the school districts to their feet to the fire to make sure that when they put that levy out to the voters, that's what that money is spent on, and they're not spending it on other things.
Do you feel the language was tightened around that?
The language was tightened around that. However, just because we pass something and we say that that's what the language is, there's 295 school districts. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of those school districts interpreted our language certain ways and decided to spend it a different way.
This is the state auditor's job.
Correct.
Correct. Are they adequately staffed to take care of that, do you think?
Well, so that's the interesting thing. So what I found was that apparently when Troy Kelly was our state auditor, that the legislature kind of gave a vote of no confidence and reduced the dollars that and the staffing that Troy Kelly had. So
Kelly?
Huh?
Oh, it was reduced?
Yes. So as a result, that, like, for example, for Wazoo, so I've been working with the University of Washington with some other issues regarding the auditor's office, and it come to find out that the auditor's office was not doing their job partially because the legislature reduced the staffing for them, and now that we have Pat McCarthy, that I trust she will do a much better job than Troy Kelly, and so we had increased the her staffing, and I believe that she was just in the process of hiring some more staff, but there is a huge backlog as to what the auditor's office is supposed to do. So I have a funny feeling that with all the different school districts, that it may take some time to ensure that she's able to do the job.
Did the process that came about require more of the districts? I remember that was one thing we talked about before, was that fear of, you also don't want to overload them with so much paperwork that can't
Correct.
be done. How did that kind of get solved?
To tell you the truth, I don't know the exact details of the final passage for that piece. I can look into that for you, but I do know that we put language in there to make sure that the levy dollars were supposed to be spent as they sold it to the voters. There was a little bit of back and forth in terms of what that would look like, and I think what I always find interesting is that different people interpret what the words are differently, and so I have a funny feeling that as we move forward that there will be some school districts that probably try to spend the dollars differently, and they'll kind of either have to make some other tweaks in the legislature, or
Sure. No, I understand your point that
and when we first passed the McCleary fix, there were some unintended consequences, you know, that came about, and one of those was supposedly, you know, we had a hold harmless provision in there. Well, Peninsula School District, they have a greater number of educators with more experience, more education, and so as a result, because of how they also did the wonky regionalization formula, they were actually going to be getting less funding than, you know, with the McCleary fix. And so this last year, that was one of the big things that we did, was we also added more, you know, we increased the regionalization, didn't necessarily fix it, but increased it for Peninsula School District, and then also increased the amount so that they could cover the costs of the higher, you know, the more experienced teachers.
You mentioned special education. I'm
Correct.
assuming this is because some of those services are outside the basic education definition.
Well, actually, special education should be included as part of basic
Okay,
education.
so then
The
when you see
problem is that what they did, I guess, when they first decided to allocate the funding, is they took all the special ed kids, and you have to realize that they range quite a bit. So you can have someone with cerebral palsy who needs an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, and then also have someone who has minor, you know, minor ADHD or, you know, in needing an IEP. So they might need just a little bit of help, but what they did was they took the kids, the whole spectrum of kids, and then they averaged it, and they said, okay, so we're going to give you X amount of dollars. Well, the problem is that there's, like for Bremerton School District, that's a huge issue for Bremerton School District, because the Navy kind of advertises that we have the ability to provide medical care and services for families where they have higher needs kids. So as a result, Bremerton School District attracts a higher percentage of higher needs kids. So if you're taking the average between the lower needs and the higher needs, and then you have a school district where they're way outside of the realm, they're not able to adequately fund for special education. And so we increase the amount, but it's not enough.
Would the fix be then just asking for more detail from each district as far as their costs?
So, well, one of the things I'd like to see is, instead of just doing an average, I think that we also need to start looking at what the needs are of the students.
Like breaking down more categories of
right,
severity.
yeah, because there is a huge difference between a kid that has got an IEP that needs maybe just a little bit of extra help, maybe a little bit extra time, so a teacher to double check and make sure that their homework is in their bag or something along that lines, versus a child who needs an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, and significant assistance. And it's not fair for the school districts where they do have a higher percentage of very high needs, because I believe that the threshold, I want to say it's like $20,000, so they have to prove that it's greater than $20,000 before they'll even get of one-on-one, not even with a shared amount, but of one-on-one time, before the legislature will even kick in with more funding. So if they, I think that the reimbursement's around $6,000 or something like that. I can double check on the numbers. So if you have a whole bunch of kids that require $18,000 each year, well, there's a $12,000 gap that, you know, the legislature should be funding. I mean, really, you know, I've always believed that the you know, legislature should do its job of making sure that we are providing adequate funding for education. And in some school districts we were doing that, some school districts we weren't. And so that was one of the reasons why we did the McCleary fix, and special education is one that's kind of left hanging.
Do you anticipate there's another large financial need headed into the next session as far as education goes?
Actually, well, I think that the bigger need is Western States Hospital and the RHCs. That's going to be the bigger ones. I think that that the amount for the special education is something that we can work on, and I don't think that that's going to be as big of a lift.
What about
as,
the other two? Where's
Okay.
the money going to be found for these?
Well, okay, so here's the deal. Is it for
Culverts,
no.
too.
Well, yeah. For the RHCs, we have had a huge issue with those. So right now, I want to say that the average amount, well, once we give the funding that they want, it's going to be around $1,000 a day is what it's costing to house people in these RHCs. So I just got done doing a tour over at the one over in Buckley. I think it's Rainier School, and the thing is that you had a bunch of people who have been living there. They're institutionalized. Well, now they are they're seniors. And so the whole point of an RHC is to get them job ready. It's a temporary, supposedly according to the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid, is to make it so that they're job ready. So you've got all these folks with severe dementia, and they're supposed to be actively getting them job ready. Well, it's not realistic. And so I think one of the big fixes is going to be taking that cohort, the older group, and having it being converting it to a SNF, or a skilled nursing facility, because that's something that we can do. That the cost should go down drastically for a skilled nursing facility.
And that's something the state does not run at all right now. You would need to create.
Well, actually, they converted. I believe that they converted two of the other ones. I think it's Lakeland and Fircrest to the skilled nursing for the exact same thing, because the problem is if you've got people who've been living there and they're happy living there, to move them is a huge stress for a lot of folks. When I worked in the nursing homes, when the state would go in and close down these nursing homes, some people, when they moved them, because they're pretty fragile, they would pass away. That they don't do well. I mean, I don't even like moving. So I mean, when you're 97 years old and you're frail, I mean, it's a huge thing on you. And so you kind of have to take that into consideration also. I don't necessarily believe that that's the best, I get that we have to do certain things in order to get the federal dollars. Well, the federal dollars for that is quite small compared to the state dollars that we're putting in. And for $1,000 a day, I don't think we're getting the bang for our buck for that, And then for Western States, I think Western States is around $1,000 a day also for them. And I'm sorry, there's some significant management issues that we have there. Some of the same issues that they had. I just got done reading the citations, or the 76 pages for the citations for Western States Hospital. And when I went and toured them, I think it was last year, the same problems that they had last year are some of the same problems that they're still having today. And when they do the surveys, working in the nursing homes, it's almost identical, where the state comes in, and then once they decide that you've got an issue, then they're there looking at everything. And I've seen some of the management with some of my nursing homes where they were able to turn that around, where they get in there and they read every single thing, all the criteria. They put measurements in place, because they'll say, okay, you can't have the heating element within 6 inches of the wall or whatever. So they'll go through with a ruler. They make sure that they have their I's dotted and their T's crossed. Even simple things like, for example, they didn't have an adequate grievance, adequate grievance process. I mean, that was something that they should have checked. They didn't have adequate, information on their staff to make sure that they were up to date on their first aid and TB tests. I mean, those are like simple things that when they first got the citation, that they should have said, okay, well, these are pretty simple things that you can make sure that gets done, that it's reasonable that the surveyor would start looking into some of that stuff. Some of the other ones that they were cited on, I would need more information. For example, one of the other ones that they were cited on was the amount of time that they restrained people. And in all fairness, I feel like they were having such a huge issue with staff being harmed and some of the other residents who were being harmed by certain personnel. So then, I don't know, I always feel like sometimes it's hard to tell what the correct amount of restraint is for somebody. And so I think before maybe that they weren't restraining well enough, and then supposedly now that they decided they were restraining too much. But in all fairness, if they would have let them go right away, who knows if they would have caused damage. I would need more information.
There have been problems with turnover, whether at the
Yep.
executive ranks or we've heard stories about nurses who they just cannot keep people
Correct.
In that environment. Is that a money issue? Is it something other than that the legislature would address also? So
when I've talked to the staff, it's very similar to with the same problem we have with turnover with our caseworkers for foster care, where there's the money piece is a piece of that, but the complaints that I've heard, it was more of a safety issue. You know, it was how they were treated. And for Western State Hospital, it was mostly the safety issue. And I think that there was, I want to say it was like once a week, one of the staff members was being injured to the point where they would be reporting it. That's a lot of injuries. I talked to one other former worker where, you know, I mean, she has permanent damage in her arm from one of the residents. And I think that the safety concerns are significant, you know, and for the caseworkers, I mean, for the Children's Administration, I mean, for them it was how poorly they were treated. And they said that they were passionate about what they were doing. Obviously, they would like a raise, but the reasons why they left, it was more of a safety issue.
The reform coming there. Go back to schools real quick. I'm going to let Paul ask his question.
So Michelle, I'm wondering about school violence. Too. You run the education committee in the state, you know, the legislature. Given the recent spate, well, the recent's been going on for a while, the shootings, etc. So, from your perspective, from the state level, what should we be doing differently to deal with school violence?
Well, a couple things. One is Representative Manweller had a bill that I believe passed this year. He put it forward multiple years, and that was a system where children could report anonymously when they saw some of the issues. And then in addition, because there's 295 school districts, and in my opinion, I think that every school district should be treated very differently because they're all very unique. And I think that we need to have funding available so that they can cater whatever safety precautions need to be done. So for example, we have one school district, Stehicum, I always mispronounce it, Stehicum. And yes, and they've got like 4 students out in the middle of nowhere, you know. 6. Oh, they have 6 now? Oh, they had 4 a couple, okay. And I don't think that, they may not have any safety issues, you know, so maybe they don't need to do a whole lot of anything, you know. I mean, and however, when I go to South Kitsap High School, especially when kids are in the middle of changing classes, I see a lot of safety issues there. You know, and I don't know what the best solution is. That's not my area of expertise, but I think that every school, there should be some sort of a safety plan, and we should allow funding to figure out what that is. And so I don't have the solutions for each school in each school district, but I definitely see some serious safety issues that we have, and they need to be addressed.
So you would be not opposed to providing some state funding to the various districts to address the issues?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Let me ask another question, as long as I'm asking questions. And I'm going to ask Alan's question. He's not here, one of the board members.
Okay.
It's more of a tax question, a financial question. So the tax system in the state, according to one of our board members, feels very inequitable to him. He believes that it's on the backs of the property owners for taxing. And thinks there ought to be maybe looking at a different system. And he has talked about considering a state income tax. Where do you stand on that?
I'm opposed to a state income tax. And I agree that we should probably revamp how we do our tax system in our state. Even though me personally, I'm opposed to a state income tax, what I will say is that I feel like I'm there to represent the people of the 26th legislative district. And I feel very confident from looking at how the carbon tax went, that even if I was in support of a state income tax, the people of the 26th district overwhelmingly are against it. So I don't think I would be doing my job if I was in support of that. I am on appropriations. However, with the current makeup of the legislature, I don't see any major changes going on with the tax system.
Do you think another way what Alan is kind of asking with this question is, what is the way to get into that conversation, other than just should we add an income tax or not? Because it seems it often boils down to that, and you're right. People have said they don't want that.
Right, and
what's the way to start talking about reforming it, just so it puts our state on more stable ground? Is that a conversation you're willing to have, or how do you
absolutely.
How do you think a split legislature gets into that talk?
With the current makeup, I'm telling you that it's not even on the table, and I mean, I would be more than happy to be part of a discussion. I mean, really honestly, when it comes to fixing how we fund education, had it not been for the Supreme Court putting a lot of pressure on the legislature, had it not been for you guys and other other news across the state that putting pressure on the legislature, I don't think that we would have ever changed how we fund education, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah.
So unless there was, and just being realistic, just because I'm not I'm not the speaker, because there's certain people where they have a whole heck of a lot of power in the legislature, and unless they're willing to make a change, that I just don't see it happening.
Here, I'll frame it this way, and maybe it just takes it down a notch so it's a little more digestible. We all know there's probably a pending problem with the gas tax that's likely to continue declining, and so it won't be the Supreme Court, but it may be reality says you don't have enough money to fix the roads. There's ideas like tolling more, ideas like vehicle miles traveled. How do you get that conversation going, and which are there any options there that you say, yeah, we need to, this may be something that helps us kind of make sure there's money to do the infrastructure we need to get done?
There is a lot of conversation on that. I know that there's a lot of pushback when it comes to tolling by mileage because of privacy concerns. And I share some of those concerns as to how exactly we're going to do that. There was a study that was passed, I believe, last year to kind of look at that, and they're currently looking at what that would look like in terms of how to find some sort of an alternative way of
I think
funding.
There's a couple going on right now.
Right,
some use it, some don't use it.
Right. The benefit with the gas tax is that it's very inexpensive, and also people get charged while they're using it. Unfortunately, in our state, a lot of people may not have very good budgetary priorities, and so as a result, I think that to wait and give somebody a big whole bill after 3 months, I think it's going to be a huge issue for some people. So, because there's talk about maybe doing like a quarterly bill of what the gas tax would have been. The nice thing with the gas tax is that if people don't have funding, then they can budget and say, okay, well, maybe I can't fill up my tank until next week or something like that. Whereas I'm a little worried about doing either an annual fee or a quarterly fee or something like that, because I think it's going to be a huge hit to people's budgets, even though it might still be the same amount, but because of how the average consumer budgets in our state, I'm a little worried about that. So
Electric cars.
well, and then that's the other thing too, is that with electric cars, so there was a huge push to get us not dependent on gas, and so now we have electric cars, and probably within the next, I would think at least within the next decade, that's going to be the more common thing, and it very well may be that we're going to be charging per when people fill up, more when people fill up, or, recharge. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so that may be a possibility. There's also talk because, depending on where you're located, the bike routes also cost a lot of money, and they're also not paying their quote-unquote fair share, so what does that look like? And I think that there's a lot of people where this is something we're going to have to look into. And for me, my biggest concern is to make sure that whatever the method is that there are safety, that there's a security piece, because I do not believe that the government should be tracking where you go. There's that piece. And then the other piece is to make sure that things are fair. So for example, the cost of driving a mile in a fancy tunnel is very different than driving a mile in on the key pen roads that are not well maintained, right? So there's an equity piece there, and then also too to make sure that the average consumer is able to budget and pay for it fairly, if that makes any sense, so that they're not hit with, like for example, I just had somebody who shared with me their $1,300 car tab, because it was over $1,000 for the Sound Transit, and that's a huge sticker shock that a lot of people don't budget for, and can't.
You have an opponent. You have a primary opponent who's
do.
running as a Republican. This is an odd thing for a two-term person. We spoke with him the other day, and he is portraying himself as more conservative than you. Now, I don't know if you take that. I have no idea how you take that, but how do you respond to? He criticized some of the work you did with Democrats. How do you respond to how he's positioning himself politically?
So it's very interesting, and most of the votes that he has attacked me on, because it changes, the votes change on a regular basis. So most of the ones that he's attacked me on are the same. Senator Angel also voted with me, in the Senate for those same exact bills. One of the big ones, it was also the Kitsap County Republican Party that attacked me on it. For almost an hour, I got...
What vote was it?
It was for the conversion therapy bill.
Oh.
And after hearing the testimony, I personally believe, and you have to realize that even if I personally believe something, I feel like I'm there to represent the people of the 26th district. Okay, so if I personally believe something, but yet the people of the 26th district believe, that would want something else, I will vote the way that the people of the 26th district, that I believe that the people of the 26th district would want me to vote. Okay, and after hearing the testimony of grown men who had gone through this conversion therapy and the torture that I would describe as torture, I really believe that the people of the 26th district would want to ban this practice of conversion therapy. I think that putting someone in an ice bath to change them from being gay to straight is bizarre. And I also think that's the right thing for our state. And if the people of the 26th district believe otherwise, then they have a choice to vote me out of office. I think that, you know, so that was one of the big ones that I got, you know, that I got attacked with, and I stand by that vote. And so.
Well, okay, one of the things you're criticized, and I'm not criticizing this because I actually think we need more of it, is that you co-sponsor bills with members of the other party. Where do you see, what issues do you think you, I'm not trying to label any of your views here, but where do you see eye to eye with Democrats and say, this is something I agree on and I think we can move forward?
So here's the deal, is that in the legislature, all 4 years I've been in the minority, okay? So I could do a whole lot of grandstanding. I could drop all sorts of bills to say, you know, darn those Democrats, and therefore, you know, we're going to, you know, do whatever, right? You know, we're gonna give everybody, I don't know, anyhow, I could do a lot of grandstanding. However, I don't think that that's the way to do effective legislating. I think that the best way, you know, there's a lot of times where I'll have an issue and I look at the issue and I say, what is it that I think could get passed? Okay, so if I decide to go ahead and drop a bomb and blast those darn Democrats, then why would they want to work with me on anything? I mean, they're in the majority. So I have to work with the chair. I have to work with and make sure, I have to work with the leadership over in on the Democrat side, and I need to make friends across the aisle. And I would much rather sit down. There's been many times where I had what I thought was a fantastic bill drafted, and I sat down with the Democrats and they say, well, we're not even going to hear it. They said, but if you change this, this, and this, then you'll get a hearing. I said, okay. So I go back to the table, and it's pretty typical for you to have them co-sponsor a bill with you, because that way you have their support. Then other Democrats will decide that maybe that they want to support it also, and you know, I mean, there's 147 legislators in Olympia. I would be foolish to think that I could do anything without the support of others. I mean, it's silly, and so I believe that in order to be the most effective legislator, you have to work across the aisle.
Can I ask a question about
Go ahead.
that? So I don't know if there's a legislative scorecard. You know, this is what I'm thinking. You know.
Oh, they have all sorts of.
Yeah, I'm sure there are.
It depends on the group, and it depends on what they think is important.
I'm sure there is. So in terms of your voting record, okay, so how many times you voted with the Democrats and voted with the Republicans, what percentage? I mean, I don't know if you have that information.
Well,
you must have
it's
something.
Okay, well, it's funny because that is what my my opponent is supposedly attacking me on, is that it was 67% of the time with the Democrats. But then someone else said that I voted 96% of the time with the Republicans. So the problem is that you can take, you know, I mean, you guys know, you can take different bits and pieces of information and use it however you want. What they don't take into consideration is how many of those bills are unanimous. You see? So if you take out all the unanimous votes, then what is it? And for each and every, you know, like I said, for each and every vote that I've taken, I'm more than happy to explain why I voted that way. And I have the support of the state Republican Party. I'm the only one that's endorsed by Senator Angel, and I also got the support of the House Republican Caucus. So, you know, if the people of the 26th district thinks that we should be, you know, throwing kids into ice baths to make them straight, and they think that I took a bad vote, then so be it.
You're a medical professional in your other side of your life.
Yes.
And the last time I remember we spoke about the opioid
Yes.
epidemic, and you were really interested in some of the issues from the prescription side. She's a dentist, by the way.
Yes.
A, what progress did that make, and B, what, given where this kind of drug problem is today, and it's certainly heightened awareness from the last time we spoke, what do you think needs to be done next from a state perspective?
So, very, very good question. I am the only person in the legislature who's ever had prescriptive authority. So I feel like I have a very unique perspective. I put forward a couple different bills. One was to do kind of a graded dosage packet. The other one was to fix the reporting system that we have within our state, because it's not user-friendly for the dentist. They made it user-friendly for the hospitals, and as a result, more physicians started reporting. But right now, it's a pretty archaic process in order to even go in and log in and check anybody. So it's time-consuming, and it needs to be user-friendly. Originally, when we started this last session, there was talk of making it so that people could only get like a 3-day prescription. And I don't know why they chose 3 days as the magic number. The Attorney General's office put his bill forward. The problem with opioids is that there's a wide range, okay? So for example, you've got your Robitussin with codeine that is not very addictive at all, right? And then you've got highly addictive Percocet, where the sad part is that because a lot of people, legislators, are very well-intentioned, sometimes they just want to put something forward and maybe don't understand all the nuances and some of the unintended consequences. So if you have a 3-day prescription of Robitussin, I don't know why that's going to be helpful. That means grandma's got to go, for her 2-week supply, she's got to keep showing back up at the doctor's office and keep getting the prescription filled. That makes absolutely no sense. I don't think that's going to really help our opioid problem. On the other side of things is that what they consider, because they would have like a pill count. Well, the problem with a pill count is that for me as a prescriber, I would normally prescribe like Tylenol with codeine, which is not very strong. But let's say that I had a larger gentleman where 10 pills isn't going to do the trick for codeine. So instead, me wanting to make them out of pain, I would probably prescribe a more potent dosage because I want to make sure he's pain-free for the next couple days. Also, too, what happens if the person gets a surgery on Thursday? They get a surgery on Thursday. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. On Sunday, when I run out of my pills, I'm going to go to the hospital. And that's the last place that we need people. In addition, what about all the chronic pain folks? That if we put down a 3-day limit, it's not fair for the chronic pain users. So what I did was I partnered with Governor Inslee's office, and I was one of the co-sponsors for his bill. We were able to almost get it passed, and it was more focused on treatment. They wrapped in some of my 2 bills that I put forward, and they changed it instead of a graded dosage packet to a partial fill piece, and then also included the pieces with the reporting, and it was more treatment focused. It was a great bill, but because the governor may or may not have upset some people with the transparency bill, that didn't get passed. So I'm hopeful.
Come back?
Yes, there's talk that will be one of the first things that we'll wind up doing, because we definitely need to. We need something that's thoughtful and not reactive, because my fear sometimes with whenever there's a problem is that, and we've seen it historically, is that people want to hurry up and fix it, but then it creates so many other problems that you know, that's not good either. So my whole thing with the opioid legislation that comes forward is I want it to be well thought out. I want it to make sure that the folks with chronic pain and you know, that they're taken care of, and that it's realistic, so that we're not increasing a whole bunch of barriers for people to be pain-free.
Were methadone clinics included in the treatment aspect of that bill?
I believe so. So I will double check, but I believe so, yes.
And the other issue I know that comes up is carrying, and now I'm blanking on the name of it, the shots that can be given by
Yes.
first responders.
Yes.
Naloxone.
And I believe that
Yeah.
that one got passed.
Okay, that did.
So sometimes when things come through the legislature, what happens in the House gets changed in the Senate, and then sometimes the governor vetoes too. And so, so I always like to double check before I let you know, because sometimes I'm like, yeah, we did this, and then the governor vetoed a part of it. So you're just like, oh, okay, well, I guess we almost did it.
We can check. Other questions? Anybody else?
By the way, you're right, there's lots of scorecards.
There is.
Yeah.
So it depends on the group. That's the funny thing, is it depends on the group, and it depends on what is their priority. So, but I'm more than happy to have anyone in the 26 or anywhere else contact me about any specific bill, and you know, go from there.
Cool.
Yes. Along those lines, basically, you said you always want to go with you know, your electorate. Can you think of any issues that might come up where, in your best judgment and good conscience, you could not go along with what your voters want? Or if such a situation came up, what would you do?
Well, probably one of the votes that I took that was really hard for me was because I'm a dentist, and it was increasing the age of tobacco products. And for me personally, I would love to see all tobacco products just poof, gone.
Up in smoke.
Just up in smoke. But, you know, that's not, I really believe that that's not what the 26th district wants. And that was a hard one for me, because I remember when, you know, when they banned smoking indoors, and even though I loved it because I hated the smell that would go in my hair anytime I would go to a restaurant, people were really upset. And that was one that I really struggled with, so I voted no on that. And, you know, and unless that I see evidence otherwise, you know, that was one that I really had a hard time with. But for the most part, I feel that most of the votes that I've taken, you know, that they, you know, same thing with like the sales tax. Like, I'm personally opposed to the sales tax because I really don't trust our legislature. I don't trust what future legislators will do, and I think that it's just going to be added on and not ever have a reform in place. I think that so for me personally, I'm opposed to the sales tax, and I'm very grateful that I believe the 26th district is opposed to the increasing the sales tax as well. Or increasing doing a state income tax, I'm sorry.
So, you know, I'm sitting here thinking on that vote on the tobacco, you as a dentist, and you know the dangers, et cetera, obviously, as we all really should or do. So that you sort of gave up your vote in terms of, because it was not popular, even though it wasn't necessarily the right thing to do, based on the fact that you wanted to represent your district. So I think Jim's question is really a good one. So you wouldn't go against the will of the 26th district, even if you really believe it's not in the best interest of the community at large, beyond the 26th district?
Well, I think that my job is there. My number
Sure.
one job is to represent the 26th legislative district.
I understand that. No, you made that very clear.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering though, but you're not willing to take an unpopular stand because of that?
Well,
see, my question here is what I'm trying to get at is that sometimes the right thing to do may not be the popular thing to do.
which is is correct, and sometimes the right thing to do is not popular with a certain group of people, which is why I've been under so much fire for
Yeah,
taking
I
a
guess maybe the
stance.
other one.
Yeah,
Okay, fair enough.
so regardless, so there's many votes that we take
Yeah.
that we're not gonna make anybody happy.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll make some people
Yeah.
happy, but we're gonna make other people unhappy. And that's part of the job,
Yeah.
you know, and, you know, I've taken a lot of heat for that vote and for, you know, a couple other votes as well. But, for me, I really believe in listening to every single person in my district, regardless of how noisy they are or how quiet they are. I read every single email. I will take any meeting. If someone even shows up in the down in Olympia and they don't have a appointment or anything, there was one day in particular where there was 50 different people who showed up. I made sure that I met with every single one of them. We did have to cut their meetings down to 6 minutes apiece, but I will meet with every single person because I believe that that's my job. And from the input that I get from the public, that's how I decide. I mean, a lot of the votes that we take aren't real controversial, but for the ones that are controversial, I really believe in listening to everybody.
Let me just, I'm gonna jump right on that, because I think, as much as any district in the state, you guys are 26 is very split, you know.
It is.
It's all Republican delegation right now, but I think there's a real balance that you're walking when you listen to people. With being somewhat specific, not just too broad, but what do you think, as you listen, what is the top priority you would bring down to Olympia with you next session from what you're hearing?
Well, there's a couple different ones, but probably one of the bigger ones is education and
Be a
the
little
school,
more specific.
well, the school construction. I mean, the bonds have failed in both South Kitsap and also for Peninsula School District. I mean, you know, you guys know that a lot of the students came together with for South Kitsap High School. My daughter graduated from South Kitsap, and she said, "Mom, it's too crowded there," and that was before that they added the 9th graders. And I know that technically they're not over capacity, but realistically, she said, you know, it's too hard to get from one class to another. There needs to be, you know, we've got a couple grades that are, you know, that's one of the hard parts is that you can't, you know, the schools can't regulate and say, okay, this year no one can have kids, or we have to reduce the number of kids that come in, right? And so as a result, you know, we have a couple grades that are really causing some heartache for our school districts because they're trying to figure out where to put these kids.